You're listening to ArchaeoEd, a podcast about the ancient civilizations of the Americas. I'm your host, Ed Barnhart. I've been an archaeologist, an explorer, and a seeker of esoteric knowledge all over the Americas for 30 years and counting. This podcast is just me, no guests to help me fill the airtime. Sometimes I'll teach you about the many civilizations of the Americas long before Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Other times, I'll tell stories of my adventures in the field. It's just me, freed from the podium and talking like we're just having a beer together. If that sounds good to you, then sit back, relax, and let me tell you a tale. Season 7, Episode 3, Ancestral Pueblo Religion. I've had a bad cold all week, but the show must go on, so forgive me if my voice is a little raspy this time. This is an episode on a subject that I don't know as well as I'd like. I'm pushing myself to have another look and to try to make sense of it. In times past, I always get bogged down in the various myths, legends, and stories. There are many modern Pueblo versions, with few ways to see it reflected in their ancestors, the Ancestral Pueblo. There are a number of reasons for that. So, let's start this episode with a pessimistic list of the obstacles to our understanding. Since this episode is a continuation of the last one, if you don't know who the Ancestral Pueblo are, I'll refer you to that last episode. The first obstacle is the lack of pictorial art produced in Ancestral Pueblo times. They made beautiful painted pottery, but preferred geometric patterns over the images of people, animals, or places. If there were pictorial murals, none survived. When we do have evidence of painted walls, it's either geometric patterns or no pattern at all. Very simple. Rock art is all over the place, even in Chaco Canyon, and it does show figures like humans and animals and even celestial objects, but rarely in any groupings that seem like narratives. Compare that to Mesoamerica or the Mississippians, where we have tons of religious narratives identified through their art. We don't get that for Ancestral Pueblo. The Mogollon to the south did paint figures onto their beautiful Mimbres bowls, and we've even begun to tease out some religious symbolism out of those. But that's Mogollon, not Ancestral Pueblo as we currently define it. I really think we're being too much lumpers there, but that's a whole nother podcast episode. After the 13th century Great Drought, we begin to see murals and rock art that look like modern Kachinas. More on that later. But Spanish contact in the 1500s was brutal, and the European diseases they brought devastated the Pueblo population. And that brings me to our second obstacle. The Spanish didn't ask enough questions. I've read the chronicles around Coronado's initial expeditions into the Southwest, but I find precious little as to the local religion. There are tempting little tidbits like the existence of a priesthood and that women aren't allowed in kivas, but not much. On this point, I could just be ignorant. Maybe there are Spanish priest ethnographies that I'm not aware of. That would be a great project for a bilingual person to take on. So if you're interested in the subject, I think that's a place we might find more info, and I'd like to hear from you. The sources of information at my disposal are all from the late 1800s, after the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo gave the Southwest to the United States. If not for the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, the situation might be even worse. But by the time of the first detailed ethnographies, the Pueblo people had been acculturated and Christianized for over 300 years. Things like the Pueblo creation story, the Kachinas, and many myths and legends were recorded in the late 1800s, but they don't completely match up. Things Frank Cushing recorded among the Zuni were not the same as Jesse Fuchs recorded from the Hopi. Other ethnographies from pueblos like Zia and Acoma are yet other slightly different versions. Yes, there was similarity, especially in their creation stories, but not enough to reconstruct a pan-Pueblo version. Then there's the inconvenient fact that most of those early American ethnologists were looting ancient artifacts to sell to museums back east. Cushing was actually tried and convicted of doing so by the Zuni. That makes me suspicious of how much truth they were sharing with him. Another obstacle is the multiple Pueblo languages still existent today. There are 4 major groups: Zuni, Hopi, Karasan, and Tanoan. Tanoan is further broken up into 3 more languages: Tewa, Tiwa, and Towa, and all of those are mutually unintelligible. Hopi is an Udo-Aztecan language, and Zuni is considered a language isolate. Tanoan and Karasan may have deeper local roots. For me, the very fact that they speak different languages means that they had different deep cultural places of origin. Did they all get together at some ancestral Pueblo point in time and decide upon a shared creation story? It's next to impossible to say at this point. Another obstacle is the disconnect between the recorded creation stories and modern Pueblo religious practices. Modern kivas have a hole in the floor called a sipapu, which is the name for the cave tunnel that the first people emerged from to the surface world. So that's one connection, but it's hard to find others. The strongest manifestation of Pueblo religion today is the Kachinas. The Kachinas are spirits that live in the mountains and come to the Pueblo villages at key times during the year. There are hundreds of known Kachinas. Some are animals, some are plants, some are elements like rain or wind. A handful are anthropomorphic supernatural beings. People of the Pueblo clans dress in Kachina costumes and dance in the public plazas. When they do, it's more than just a show. They are vessels that those spirits inhabit. But until earliest the 13th century, hundreds of years after Chaco Canyon, we see no evidence of the Kachinas. When and where did they enter the picture? I don't think we know. Now, to perhaps the most serious obstacle to our understanding of ancestral Pueblo religion. The modern Pueblo people don't want us to. They would honestly like gringos like me to stop asking questions. They believe the past is gone and it should stay gone. Have you ever seen a Pueblo genealogy chart? Not Christian, Pueblo. I haven't. That's just not how they roll. Other Native American cultures that I work with, the Maya, Zapotec, Quechua, Ho-Chunk, Muskogee, etc., they're all very interested in recovering their past. But not the modern Pueblo people. They honor their ancestors, but in a more collective and general fashion. They speak about our ancestors. They'll discuss the words of their grandparents, but not people of more distant generations. And there's reason to believe that that was their attitude in the past as well. While the Maya were recording the names and deeds of their dynasties of kings, the people of Chaco Canyon were not exalting individuals in their art whatsoever. So before I go any further into this episode, let me sincerely apologize to any Pueblo listeners who wish I would just shut up. Cultural understanding is a relationship between cultures, each trying to understand the other through their own lens. From my cultural perspective, asking questions like this denotes an interest in and respect for others' cultures. It's my hope that Pueblo people can see that that's what's in my heart and forgive my inappropriate pursuit of questions they themselves do not want answers to. Okay, my first commercial break will be here. When I return, we'll talk about Pueblo creation stories. In my capacity as the director of Maya Exploration Center, I'm proud to announce our 2026 educational tour program. We've got 4 trips already planned out, and we'll probably add a few more when 2026 begins. In January, we're running our 3rd Olmec World Tour. The route takes you through the Olmec heartland and to see all 17 Olmec colossal heads. In February, Zach Lindsay will lead his amazing tour to Calakmul and the ruins of the Chenes region. Then in May, just before the rainy season, Zach will lead our newest tour concept, the Maya Peten Wars Tour. Akin to World War II and Civil War tours, we have enough information to lead one about the wars that rocked the Maya world in the 7th and 8th centuries CE. Zach's expertise in Maya hieroglyphics make him the perfect leader for that tour. Finally, Luke Caverns will be leading his 3rd tour to Machu Picchu in July. It's a great trip, full of amazing ruins, interesting people, and llamas. If you're interested in learning more, visit our website, www.mayaexploration.org. At MEC, we know our stuff, we love what we do, and we have friends everywhere. Let's talk about the various versions of the Pueblo creation story. There's a lot of differences, but also deep similarities. Before I begin, a quick cop-out. I'm going to discuss the characters and places in these stories using their English translated names. Many of the Pueblo words are very long and hard for me to say. So, I'd rather be criticized for not trying than spending the rest of this episode mispronouncing someone's deity's name. So first, let's go to the points of agreement. All Pueblo peoples see the cosmos as a 3-tiered place: the upper world, the earth, and the underworld. In point of fact, every ancient American civilization religion saw a 3-tiered universe. All Pueblo creation stories begin with a creator deity who lives in the sky. Most, but not all, stories also identify that creator deity as the sun. Usually he's male in gender, though some Pueblos see him as genderless or both genders. That creator deity creates the surface of the world and the realm underneath. Then he creates supernatural beings to manage it for him. Those managers are different across the Pueblos. More on that in a moment. All the stories state that the first humans and animals emerged from underground to the surface of the earth. The number of underground worlds change, but everyone speaks of that human emergence as a symbolic birth from the womb of the earth. There are many other connections between the creation stories, but those are the major ones they all share. To me, it's that emergence from the inside of the earth that's so interesting and unique. Every other ancient American civilization that I can think of has humans being created on the surface of the world. The fact that the Pueblos stand apart with this humankind evolving in the underworld is fascinating. I think it could be interpreted as an indicator that the Pueblo people have been in the Southwest for a very, very long time. Long enough for their stories to have diverged from the others. And that would also be a counter-narrative to those that theorize that the Ancestral Pueblo were Mesoamerican transplants. Well, okay. Let's go through some of the differences between Pueblo creation stories. Zuni and Hopi are the best represented in the literature, and the most open to foreigners. Acoma Pueblo is also very welcoming. They even give public tours of their ancestral village called Sky City. On the other end of the spectrum is Taos Pueblo, who are polite, but traditionally keep their ceremonies and beliefs away from strangers. Let's start with the Hopi creation story. I've never been to Hopi Pueblo, but I've met Hopi folks. Hopi is the only pueblo in Arizona, and my trail never seems to get me there. Anyhow, Hopi creation begins in a void, with nothing but the creator deity. When he creates the world, he becomes the sun god. He does not create humans. He creates Spider Woman, sometimes called Grandmother Spider, and she creates the first living beings. It's she who guides humans up to the surface world. In other Hopi versions, the creator goes one step further and creates two women to guide the humans. They're called Hard Woman of the East and Hard Woman of the West. In those versions, Spider Woman advises the two women in their leadership roles. They go down into the world to the lowest level, creation number 1. There, it's totally dark, and humans are bugs. They don't like it there at all, and they follow Spider Woman to the next, second creation. In that second world, humans transform into wolves and bears. She keeps leading them upwards, and finally in the third world, they turn into humans. Spider Woman trains them to handle the next surface world. She teaches them pottery, weaving, and farming. But there's a scary deity there, a god of death named Skeleton Man. He wears a hideous mask and rules over the land of the dead. Spider Woman helps humans find a long, hollow bamboo reed that they crawl through to the final surface world. That hole is called Sipapu, and the holes in the floors of the kiva are said to be symbolic Sipapus. Once upon the surface of the world, people spread out to find out where they belong. The Hopi settle in what's now Arizona. Some versions count 4 creations, others say 5, with the surface world as the 5th. The Acoma creation story is similar, but with some interesting differences. First, the two women are sisters, daughters of the Creator. They create all life, humans, animals, plants, but they're stuck in the complete darkness of the underground. The Creator sends Thought Woman to help them. The correlation to Spider Woman is very clear. But in the Acoma version, Thought Woman gives the sisters baskets of seeds. She instructs them to plant pine tree seeds there in the darkness. There's a lot about how long the trees take to grow because there's no light, and how impatient the sisters are to get out of the darkness. Finally, the pine tree grows tall enough to pierce a membrane into the upper world. The sisters guide their creations up the tree trunk and into the surface world. Once upon the surface world, the sisters continue to plant their seeds and create the rest of the creatures on Earth. There's a focus on 4s, 4 directions, 4 seasons, 4 worlds, etc. 4 is a very sacred number in the Acoma version. Zia Pueblo has much the same story, but Thought Woman is called Prophesizing Woman. The Zuni have their own creation story with a lot of unique details. Still a creator deity who is also the sun, but he makes 2 other beings, Earth Mother and Sky Father. Those 2 create all the humans and creatures, but they spawn in the lowest level of the underworld. To guide them up, the Creator, Sun God, and Earth Mother get together and have babies, and those are known as the twin war gods. They go down into the darkness and lead humans up, building ladders up to each new level. Ladders, a very Pueblo thing to do, eh? The second world is called moss. The third world is called mud. The 4th is wing world. And then finally the 5th is the surface world. Once they get there, the twins help them become humans. Up until this point, they were more lizard than human, slimy, scaly, and they had tails. The twins cut off their tails, rub off the scales, and teach them to plant corn. Their final commandment is to worship the sun god, their creator. That was the story told to Frank Cushing in the 1880s. But in preparing for this episode, I came across another account in a book called Zuni Mythology by Ruth Benedict in 1935. I also learned that Ruth was the mentor of the great Margaret Mead, and that they eventually became lovers. How spicy is that? Two lesbian lovers turning early anthropology on its head. But I digress. Benedict's account added a fun twist. That it wasn't ladders, but trees that humans climbed to the surface on. They were given seeds like the Acoma tail. The first tree was a pine tree, and it grew up in just 4 days. The second was a spruce. The third was a silver spruce. And the fourth, leading to the surface, was an aspen. Each tree took just 4 days to grow. So, all the Pueblo creation stories are different, but I hope you can see how they're also very similar. Together, it's tempting to theorize that they point to a singular, earlier creation story known to the people who built Chaco Canyon. Can archaeology find any support for that? Well, unfortunately, not so far. But there are some other aspects of modern Pueblo religion that we might be able to connect. Last commercial break here. When I return, we'll talk about Pueblo priesthoods and the Kachinas. If you're a fan of archaeology, I've got a documentary recommendation for you. It's called The Stones Are Speaking. It's the story of one man's lifelong mission to protect and study one of America's oldest archaeological sites. The site is the Galt Site, located in the central Texas Hill Country, just north of Austin. So far, over 2.5 million artifacts have been found, some dating to as early as 16,000 years ago. Its champion is Dr. Michael Collins from the University of Texas at Austin. Mike was my boss in the 1990s on my first ever paid archaeological job, so I can vouch for his integrity and dedication. His quest was to find pre-Clovis man, a goal he's now achieved multiple times over. But no site had potential like the Galt site, and Mike Collins knew that. So he pulled out all the stops to protect it, fighting looters, working with the private landowners, and eventually committing his entire life savings to do so. The Galt site is a national treasure, and Mike Collins is a hero. The Stones Are Speaking is a magnificent celebration of both the site and the man. It costs a few bucks to watch it, but spending that money will encourage more films like it. Let me be clear that I'm doing this commercial for free because I support this film and I want people to know about the importance of the Galt site. To find the film, log on to galtfilm.com. I'll put a link to that in my show notes. I hope you'll join me in celebrating and supporting this important documentary film. The Stones Are Speaking. Talking about creation stories is one thing, but talking about modern Pueblo religious practices is another. The Pueblo people are gracious in inviting outsiders to witness some of their ceremonies, but others are private. Each Pueblo has a number of priesthood societies, but their members and meetings are often private or even secret. The meetings take place in the kivas, and there's that connection between ancient religion and modern religion staring right at us. Those priesthoods are responsible for the ceremonial calendar and the Kachina dances. The Kachinas, as I said earlier, are spirits who live in the tall mountains. Their home is called Kachina Village, but each pueblo has their own idea of exactly where that is. During the ceremonial cycle, the Kachinas visit the Pueblo people. For the Hopi, that's 5 or 6 months of the year. There are hundreds of different Kachinas, rarely two alike. They're all sorts of things from nature. They're animals, birds, insects, but they're also things like snow, rain, wind. There are also fantastical creatures like the clowns or the ogres. At the villages, the priesthoods have the responsibility of enacting the Kachina dances. Their human identities are hidden behind beautiful masks and costumes. On ceremony days, a group of Kachina dancers begin on the edge of town and dance into the main plaza. In some events, they give gifts to the people, recalling the stories of how the Kachinas gave humans the gift of corn farming skills. A Zuni man once told me how he attended dances as a boy. He said he knew the man in the costume was his uncle, but he wasn't himself that day. He had become the Kachina he portrayed. He invited the Kachina spirit to visit the village through him. Traditionally, Kachinas would dance up to little girls and hand them Kachina dolls. That part became very commercialized. Early European witnesses to Kachina ceremonies asked for the dolls to have as their own, and the kind Pueblo obliged. Now, stores in Santa Fe are full of Kachina dolls, selling sometimes for thousands of dollars each. So I'm told, the Kachina dolls for sale always have important flaws that make them not perfect replicas of the spirits. That would be dangerous and disrespectful, like a loose portal or an unlocked door. Zuni Pueblo has a powerful example of that taboo. There's a church in the middle of town where in the 1970s, artist Dr. Alex Sayotewa painted murals depicting the Kachinas on its upper walls. I got the chance to see them for myself about 20 years ago. They're beautiful and stunningly lifelike. But as our Zuni guide explained to my group and I, they caused a stir in the community. They were too perfect. They portrayed the Kachina spirits too well. The community demanded that the structure be closed, and eventually the Catholic authorities decommissioned it as a Christian church. On my last visit to Zuni, I asked about the church at the Zuni Museum, which is right across the street. They told me that no one is allowed in anymore. The community's plan is just to leave it alone until it falls apart on its own. Changing gears, let's talk about how the scheduling of ceremonies and pilgrimages is determined. Again, different pueblos have different nuances, but the actual days for ceremonial events are determined by the sun and moon priests. The sun priests set the agricultural-related ceremony schedules, watching the equinoxes and solstices. The winter solstice is the most important because it relates to the new year. Other ceremonies are set by the lunar cycle. Moons are broken up into groups of 6 months, and we can tell that in how their names repeat. A new month can start on a new moon or the last crescent, but even that varies. Sometimes moon and sun cycles conflict, and the priests negotiate the days for the ceremonies in those cases. Pilgrimages are often set by the moon. The modern Zuni have prescribed pilgrimage routes that visit canyons, water sources, or up to the base of sacred mountains. And they recognize that the Kachinas, when they come from their village, they're also doing a pilgrimage, but the opposite direction. So, what, if any, of this can we see in the Ancestral Pueblo? Well, for one thing, archaeologists believe we see the Kachinas represented in murals and rock art going back into the 1300s. That's well before the arrival of the Spanish, but after the region-wide resettlements after the Great Drought of the late 1200s. We see Kachina forms in rock art along the Rio Grande and in remnants of murals painted inside kivas. But those depictions do not carry back into Mesa Verde or Chaco Canyon times. So, based on the lack of evidence, we theorize Kachina beliefs started only at the end of Ancestral Pueblo times. That theory has never sat well with me. How did a tradition that strong and elaborate appear out of thin air? Another important element that I haven't even mentioned yet is Pueblo myths and legends. There are hundreds of them collected over the years. Wonderful stories involving trickster animals like coyote and fox, and charming tales of how things came to be. Anthropology tends to view those more like parables or fairy tales, not directly related to religion. But I think some of them, especially the ones that still exist across multiple pueblos, might just be dislodged pieces of their creation story. And along that same line of thought, I think there may be more to tease out of Ancestral Pueblo rock art. Over my career, I've seen the same sort of thing play out in both Maya and Mississippian archaeology. Art and iconography that once made no sense became understood as snapshots of important moments in their creation stories. Especially in the case of the Mississippian and what we call the Mississippian Shatter Zone, it looked very much like the Pueblo pattern, that there were tons of stories that different tribes and regions had, and they seemed related but not in a narrative. We've now been able to put that narrative back together and start piecing together the creation story of the Mississippians. I think we could find more in Pueblo rock art. We just haven't figured it out yet. For the final part of this episode, let's consider two aspects of Chaco Canyon: its building alignments and road system. The great houses of Chaco Canyon have been shown to align to key sunrise and moonrise points along the horizon. Collectively, there are dozens of those alignments, way beyond chance. It's tempting to correlate those decisions back to the importance of the modern Pueblo sun and moon priests. Then there's the sun dagger on top of Fajada Butte. Spiral petroglyphs interact with daggers of light cast through carefully placed boulders to mark both the sun and the moon. There's no doubt that it took people with a deep knowledge of moon and sun cycles to build that device. And yes, it's a device. Someone built it on purpose to observe the cycles and honor them. So, moon and sun priests may well be a connection between modern Pueblo people and ancestral Pueblo people. The other thing I think about is the Chaco road system. It radiates for miles out of Chaco Canyon. Very engineered, wide, substantial roads, curbs, a lot of labor and love put into making these roads. But they don't connect Chaco Canyon to outlier communities. Instead, they terminate at water sources, at the bases of mountains, or at the edge of canyons. The question has always been, why those places? It makes no sense for the transport of goods or the travel between communities. But aren't those the same kind of natural places that the Zuni pilgrimages end up at? And aren't those the same kind of natural locations that the Kachina spirits pilgrimage from to visit the Pueblos? As I said at the start, the lack of ancestral Pueblo pictorial art makes it hard to confirm. But I think there's hints of Pueblo priesthoods, pilgrimages, and perhaps even Kachinas in Chaco times. And as I just tried to explain, it's encoded in their settlement patterns. Of course, those are only theories. The fundamentals of Ancestral Pueblo religion are still inscrutable. I think I'll give the modern Pueblo themselves the final word in this episode by repeating this important point. The Pueblo would like their past to stay in the past, and they wish guys like me would stop digging it up. Until next month, this is Ed, signing off. You've been listening to ArchaeoEd, a podcast about the ancient civilizations of the Americas. If you like what you heard, please click like, subscribe, and tell your friends. If you didn't, don't do any of that stuff. ArchaeoEd is written, recorded, and produced by me, Ed Barnhart, and it's owned by my company, Ancient Explorations, LLC. ArchaeoEd is my intellectual property, all rights reserved. Copyright 2025.